Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I'm the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. And while you're here, can you just share your name and where you're from and what issues you might have with storytelling? It could be an issue where you've had success, an issue where you've had challenges. Post that in the chat room. We are focusing this month in November on marketing. We have done a lot of live discussion around developing your marketing plan, social media marketing, content marketing, and today we're going to focus on storytelling. We were supposed to do this a couple of weeks ago, but we had trouble. We want to thank you so much for joining us. All right. So again, please leave your name in the comment section. Let us know where you're from and what challenges you might have. We're going to get started with our presentation and then we will address any questions that you might have afterwards. All righty. Thank you very much. Alrighty, as I indicated before, we're going to be talking about how to own your narrative. We're going to be focusing on storytelling today and why it is so important. So we're going to be sharing the power of storytelling to build your brand as well as your community. And before we get started, as usual, I want to tell you a little bit about Nonprofit Utopia. We're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. We've created a safe environment where our members can innovate and share lessons learned on a daily basis. And we also provide ongoing professional development and webinars such as this. But if you're a member, you can go into the community and have a more in-depth conversation, set up office hours, and the like. Our mission is to develop the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. And again, we do this through ongoing professional development. We have webinars such as this. We also have classes. We have books that you can download. We have an online community and we do coaching as well. And the overall goal of the community is to give our members the tools that they need in order to not only develop themselves as leaders, but also to develop sustainable organizations. And our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector. We're going to be providing training ongoingly to up to 50,000 people between now and 2033. If you want to learn more about Nonprofit Utopia, please go to nonprofitutopia.com or join our community at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. And a little bit about myself. I have been working in nonprofit for, oh my goodness, since 1993. I have started as a financial analyst for a major institution and have also done consulting since 2003. And about 2 years ago, started Nonprofit Utopia. And my focus has been on organization development as well as community development. I ran a small nonprofit and I am using those lessons learned to develop our community, coach nonprofit leaders, and the like. I am the host of the Nonprofit Utopia Blog Talk radio show, as well as the host of this live stream. I am on faculty at UIC as an adjunct instructor. I have been teaching since about 2004, sharing information on operations management, strategic management, finance, government grants, and all of that stuff, right? And I'm also on staff at Roosevelt University teaching social enterprise and got an undergraduate degree at Spelman College in economics, as well as a graduate degree in finance and marketing from Kellogg. Alrighty, enough about me. So 2 sessions ago, we talked about SEO and We talked about what that is and why it's important. And when we talk about SEO, we're talking about search engine optimization, making sure that you're easily found on the internet when people do a search. And ideally, you want to show up on the first page. So we talked about how website crawlers work and how you can use those to your advantage to increase your chances of being on the first page when people look for you. We talked about how to create content that lets your organization be found by the people that you want to find you, such as potential clients, potential funders, potential partners. We also showed you how to create a positive user experience on your website once people get there. And then we showed you how to build online authority, meaning that your organization would be perceived as the go-to organization for a specific topic. And then we also showed you how to stand out from the crowd and to improve your rankings. And you can go onto our YouTube channel and you can download the video. And what we're going to cover this time around is the importance of storytelling in developing your organization's brand. And remember, when we talk about brand, we're talking about the whole package. It's the whole experience that people have with your organization. And storytelling is a very important part of creating that positive experience and relationship. We're also going to be talking about why it's very important for you to control your own narrative rather than have someone else paint your canvas. And then we will talk about how to use a community story during asset-based community development. So when we talk about asset-based community development, we're talking about the resources that the community already has at its disposal in order to rebuild itself rather than focusing on outside influences. And then we're going to share ways that you can leverage your story in getting volunteers, funders, as well as clients. And then we're going to show you how to tell your own story. All right, so you can see we got a whole lot to cover. So every organization has a story, whether they tell it from their own experience or someone tells it for them based on their impressions, whether those impressions are good or bad. So as I indicated before, branding is the total experience. So everyone in your organization should be very well aware of stories, right? So if you don't tell your story and all the wonderful work that you're doing, who will? And even worse, if someone else told your story because you haven't necessarily cultivated your story, what will they say? Right? So you got to be really, really intentional about cultivating your story so others can repeat the story without your even necessarily having to prompt them, right? And they're speaking from the same speaking points as you. Nonprofit organizations have to rely on stories to connect with the audience and build a community around their mission. And when we talk about community, we're talking about everyone who comes in contact with you. We're talking about stakeholders, including your clients, funders, people in, who reside in the local community as well. And you want to make sure that it's a thriving community where people are in contact with one another and all rooting for your success. So through storytelling, nonprofits can illustrate problems in the community and also show how they're uniquely qualified to address those problems with the solutions that they bring. And then you want to make sure that you can forge emotional connections so that you can, keep the relationships going and attract even more supporters. All right, so when we talk about storytelling strategy, we're looking at the big picture, right? So you want to lay the foundation of your organization's narrative. You want to identify the audiences your stories will speak to. And then most importantly, you want to first off start off with goals and objectives for your work. And then everything else will follow from the strategy and the goals and objectives. So you'll need to get agreement from the top. And when we talk about the top, we're talking about board members, as well as your executive director, your chief marketing officer. those people in leadership to make sure that priority is given to storytelling. It's not just something that you do when you write a proposal and nobody thinks about the story. So your first step is going to have to be to create our overarching story, and that will guide the other story. So your overall story, strategically, that's your organization's narrative, right? And then every other story beneath it, supports that overall narrative. So you can have narratives from your programs, narratives from your board members, narratives from people who are doing the work. Well, not narratives, I'm sorry, stories from the people who are doing the work, right? Stories from the people who are being benefited by the work, stories from people who are contributing to the success. So you want to create a culture of storytelling. And when we talk about culture, we're talking about something that infiltrates the whole organization. It's a way of doing things. So the way your organization operates, the way your organization relates to people should also include storytelling. And that should be storytelling from the top down, right? And when we talk about the top, we're talking about from the board chair to the person who, to the intern, right? So everybody should be familiar with the organization's strategy and goals, but the narrative that supports that, right? So no one person can do it alone, and you want to make sure that everyone is equipped with stories that support the narrative. So you'll need agreement from the top down to ensure that storytelling is a priority. And then you'll also need a game plan, and we're going to show you how to do that. So before you begin crafting individual stories, you got to develop an overall narrative about the organization. You want to talk about the work that the organization does and its relationship to the community, right? You want to demonstrate how your work is very, very relative and relevant to helping the community and the clients. All right, so the narrative is going to define why your organization exists, the people you serve, and how you aim to accomplish your goals. And then you want to think of this as a master narrative that's going to guide you in the development of individual stories to ensure that they all advance the same strategic ideas and everybody should be on the same page. So, for example, you might want to talk about the people served, and these are the people who are most impacted by your cause. Another way of looking at this is your targets. You want to look at your goals, and in this case, it's your audience's hopes for their lives, because remember, you want to be able to relate to the audience that's listening to your story. And then you want to talk about the problems that your organization solves. So what stands between the people that you serve and their long-term goals? And then you want to talk about the solutions. And these are very concrete, tangible ways that your organization addresses the problem and improves lives. And then finally, you want to have a call to action. So given what's going on, how do you want people to help you? Right? All right, so I'm going to pause right here. And if you're having any issues with your organization, if you want to stop and write those down, talk about the stories that your organization might tell or some of the challenges your organization may have in crafting the narrative and then the stories. All right, and then I'll address those afterwards. So you want to be very strategic in the way you describe people. So your audience is going to be more likely to support your cause if they can relate to the people that you're talking about, right? Not only do the people need to be relatable, but they have to be people that your target audience can in fact support and and, and help. And then in order to build the empathy, you have to avoid things like dry language. So you, rather than talk about people in terms of low income people, you might want to talk about hardworking families. That makes it sound more human, right? Because at the end of the day, people are giving to people. They're not giving to statistics. So you want to picture the people who benefit from the work that you do. Write down the qualities that come to mind when you think of these people. And remember last time where we talked about personas, right? So you're talking about people who, in this case, your target is, the clients that you're helping. So think of typical clients that you might help and describe them and keep those people forefront in mind as you tell your stories. So, for example, a high school diploma is an important step in preparing a young person to live an independent, secure, and happy life and to contribute to America's economic competitiveness as part of an educated, innovative workforce. But one quarter of our high school students drop out of school without getting a diploma, more than 1 million every year. So, how would you describe the people who benefit from your organization's work? Again, this is an example. So now we're leaving it up to you to describe the people that you work with. All right. And if you feel so moved, please share that in the comment section and we can look at it afterwards. All right, so let's also not forget the people who are doing the real work, right? So people who are reading about your organization, they need to understand the roles that your staff and partners, as well as your board, are playing in getting the work done. All right, and you also want to make sure that the people who are helping you to get the work done are equipped with their own stories so that wherever they go, they can become ambassadors for your organization. So the question to you is, who are your behind the scenes champions? And if you have behind the scenes champions, please write that down in the chat box. How would you describe their roles in making things happen? So when you describe the work of staff and partners, try to include tangible ways in which their work benefits the people that you serve. And it's also helpful to have candid shots of them in action. So my question to you is, who else is helping you solve the problems in your community? Is it your board? Is it your staff? Is it your community partners? Is it local residents? Is it funders? Whoever those people are, please share with us in the chat box. And then another question is, how can our supporters best help us to solve these problems? They can help by spreading the word, being an ambassador. They can help by raising funds, being volunteers, helping to introduce us to other partners, other people who can help us, and a local champion who can really rally the troops in the community to help our cause. And then another thing we need to think about when crafting our stories and narratives is, what geographies are we reaching out to get support? Is it our local community? Is it our city? Is it our county? Is it our state? Is it our country? Or is it other countries? And you want to also make sure that you can connect to people, based on geography. And a question to you is, how would you describe your supporters? And this example, America's Promise, is a national partnership that brings together hundreds of national nonprofits, businesses, communities, educators, and ordinary citizens behind the idea of making the promise of America accessible to all young people. All right, so now it's your turn. How would you describe your supporters? And then the next thing we need to focus on is our goals. So, what are the organization's goals for making a difference in the lives of the people that it serves? So, this is the overall strategy question, and you can even drill down to the program level to ask this question. Describe the goals and how they relate to the well-being of the people, and you want to try to stay aspirational. So you want to always have a goal, a stretch goal, right? That's realistic, but it's going to cause you to stretch, and it's also going to be not only aspirational, which means you're aspiring to something, but you want to make sure that your goals are inspirational, which would bring people to to action, right? So, how will your work advance the hopes and values of the people that you serve? And consider what they want for their own lives and how the world will be different for them if your organization's work was successfully accomplished. And then, to look at this, notice that your storytelling really should be um, the focus of your storytelling should be the people that you serve and the community that you serve, and your organization is going to play a supporting role, so to speak. So you want to describe the goals and how they relate to the well-being of the people that you serve. And then you want to, again, consider what they want for their own lives. All right, and here's another example. The work is empowered by the belief that all children are capable of learning and thriving, and that every individual, institution, and sector shares the responsibility to help young people succeed. And then you also want to talk about the challenges of meeting the goals. And the reason you want to talk about the challenges is you want to really make the case for your organization doing this work and why it's so important, right? So people may be inspired by the goals you're working for, but to motivate them to support your work, they also need to understand, how difficult it is, right? So my question to you is, what's standing between the people you're trying to help and the goals that they're trying to reach? Right? And then remember, while your organization might deal with complex problems, it's important when you write about these problems that you keep the language simple. And then you also want to make sure that when you describe the problem, that you don't describe it in such a way that people feel like there's no hope and, don't want to put any money into it, because people are not going to invest in your organization if they feel that the problems that you're trying to solve are just not solvable. So here's an example. Far too many young people are growing up without the support they need to succeed in school and life. More than 20% of high school students do not graduate on time. All right, so we're talking about a challenge here. So you want to also, when you talk about the story, you want to avoid the trap of presenting the story so much in statistical form as human interest. You want to make sure that the human interest is always at the fore, at the front. And then not only are you raising a problem or raising an issue, you want to also show that there's a solution. So you want to describe the solution that your organization offers, and then your solution should connect directly to the problem in a very simple, straightforward way. And then you want to also make sure that you present your case in such a way that you're showing that you have you have a track record in helping people, right? And that you've helped them in very specific, tangible ways, and people are more likely to take action in support of concrete goals rather than abstract ones. So you got to be as specific as you can when you talk about your goals and objectives. And then after that, you want to give a call to action. You want to let people know exactly what it is that you need, why you need it, and how they can help you. So you want to help your supporters understand what will be gained if they act, and just as important, what are the consequences for not taking action, right? And you also have to put it in such a way that it just makes sense to them. You want to appeal to their, I guess, more lofty selves, right? You want to appeal to what's interesting to them, what's passionate, the things that they really, really care about. So the call to action is a good place to dial up the emotional intensity of your narrative. Emotion works hand in hand with cognition to aid in attention, retention, and motivation. So remember, our emotions really, really impact the way we remember things. All right. So if people don't have an emotional reaction to the story, they're not going to remember it, and they probably won't be motivated to act. For example, get involved in your community. Find a place to volunteer. Share how you're helping to create a grad nation or donate to help the movement. All right. So that is an example of a call to action. And then you want to know your audiences, and ideally you want to segment your audiences because typically your audiences are going to include funders, they're going to include partners, they're going to include board members, they're going to include your clients, prospective clients, and you want to communicate comparable messages, but you might communicate differently to different segments of your audiences. So, who is your audience? What do they care about? What causes do they support? What will motivate them to give to your cause, and how can they best help? And you want to ask these questions for every segment of your audience. And then you also want to determine the ideal audience segments for your messaging. So, who is out there who is already helping, do the work, right? Who's doing the work that we're doing and would be helpful? Who cares about the work that we're doing and would be helpful? Who benefits from our work and who cares who benefits? Those are typical questions that you can ask. And you also want to raise awareness, once you've, determine who your audience is. Some audiences are more aware than others, and keep that in mind in your messaging. So, for those audiences who are already aware of the issues, you don't necessarily have to spell out what they are in, I guess, what I would call rudimentary form. They already know the issues, but you constantly educate them and give them updates. People who are not aware of the issues, you need to educate them and explain why the issue is important, why they should care about it. So, in order to support your cause, what do your various audiences need to know? And then another question is, how are you going to raise the awareness? And a tip here is to raise awareness, communications have to capture the audience interest or imagination of your audience so they will pay attention. Tell people something meaningful that they didn't know that'll pique their interest, right? Try to find the single most powerful fact, statistic, or idea that helps people see the situation in a new way. And I would recommend too that, if you're on places like Instagram and Facebook, you'll continue to raise people's awareness, continue to educate people by sharing factoids like this. So not only are you updating them about what's happening in your organization, but you're also sharing with them issues that are prevalent in the whole sector that you're serving or in the community that you're serving. And then you want to ask yourself, why should your audience care? So you want to start each story with a message or image about the people that are affected by your work. And you want to make sure that you tell a story in such a way that it encourages people to like them. They seem likable. They seem like people that they would respect. And ideally, you want your audience to empathize and see themselves in the story, right? These could be people that they aspire to or people that they want to help. The next thing you need to focus on is understanding. You ask yourself, what are the most important ideas that your audience needs to know in order for the problem to be solved, right? So stories about people overcoming obstacles and achieving goals can illustrate a complex problem and solution in understandable human terms and show that change is possible. So you want to find the best story that creates instant comprehension and emotional connection. So as a word to the wise, you should constantly be collecting stories from your clients, stories from your board, stories from people who are doing the work. And you want to develop a sense of urgency. Again, why is it important for people to act now? What are the consequences if people don't act right now? And again, there goes our call to action. You want to make sure that not only are people aware of the issue, but they're actually able to help you. So you want to be able to connect with people emotionally and let them know how it is that they can help you in very, very succinct, specific terms. So actions can take many forms, and here's some examples. We can ask people to learn more by downloading information. So sometimes the call to action is downloading a video that we have. Sometimes the call to action could be spreading the word by sharing information within your social networks. Sometimes the call to action could be asking others to speak out by signing a petition or writing a blog post or writing their member of Congress. Sometimes getting connected can be meeting with others with similar values and interests, and that way you can build a community around your mission. And sometimes, different people like to do different things, right? So you need to consider who your audience is, where they're found, what they like to do, how they like to communicate, and then tap into that, knowing where they are and how they like to communicate is critical in determining the call to action. And then you want to create a social impact story map. So the social impact story map is very similar to the hero's journey. In fact, it was based on the hero's journey. So this tool is adapted from the hero's journey, and it's a formula based on research about storytelling and how we process information and how stories can really impact us. All right, so the social impact story map helps you structure your story in 4 steps. First you have the status quo and the first steps, and then you have the obstacles and allies, then you have the breakthrough, and then the impact. So here is a diagram of the social impact story map. So in phase 1, you have the status quo and first steps. And in this case, the eyes are open, doubts arise, solutions emerge, and then the hero of our story takes the first steps. So usually when we talk about the eyes opening and doubts arising, these are people who are in the community, they see a problem and they figure out, enough is enough. We can't deal with the problem anymore. And then the next step is the obstacles and allies. So, who are the people who support you? Who are the people who are foes? So, friends and foes. How are people who are against what it is you're trying to do? How are they impacting you? How can you work with them, around them? How can you bring them over to your side? And with allies, how can you get them to join forces so that you're not in this alone? And then after that is the breakthrough. The breakthrough is that point where you take your first action and then you start to build momentum for addressing the problem. And then the call to action as well as the impact. At that point, you see that lives are changed or there's a potential for lives to be changed. And your call to action is, please help us so that we can continue this work. You share your lessons learned, and then you bring on others into the work. So you want to create a story, right? So you want to have a character and a setting. You want to ask yourself, who's actually telling the story? Is it you telling the story from your vantage point of program director? Is it your client telling the story from his or her vantage point? Is it you telling the story from your vantage point as a board member, as someone who volunteers? So your story might vary based on perspective, right? So it's important to consider who's going to tell the story and how their point of view is going to impact the narrative. And in an ideal situation, you're hoping that the stories are different in that they can share perspective, but you hope the stories are not so different that they are actually in conflict. If you get to a point where your client's story is negative and your board member's story is positive, that lets you know that you have a serious issue in terms of your brand, and you need to get to the root of what those conflicts are. All right, so is the narrator a part of the story, or is he external to the story? Is he or she watching the story unfold or looking back on something that has already happened? So, again, all of that is going to impact the perspective of the story and how it's told. Who's the main character? Who's the hero? And in an ideal situation, you want your hero to be your clients, the people who are, the people that you're helping. And the most effective stories are told from the perspective of an individual and not necessarily the organization. Remember, the organization has a supporting role and not the dominant role. So you want to describe the person and the situation they find themselves in at the beginning of the story. And then who are the other characters? Are there any villains? Describe their roles. So again, your organization might be a supportive character. Other characters might be other power brokers in the community. Some of those are maybe working for the good. Others may be working for the bad. And sometimes it might not be people working for the bad. It might be just conditions. There may be, the villain could be a negative um, a negative condition could be the villain. So you want to describe the roles of all the characters. And then you want to have that eye-opening experience. At what point did your main character realize that there was a problem and he needed to do something about it? All right. So you want to recreate the moment when the person realized that something needed to be done. And this can help your audience to really, really get their aha as well, especially if they relate to the character. So in this example from the storytelling.com network, there was a story, I guess, about a village in a country in Africa. They needed potable water or clean water. The water that they had was not clean. It had to, and they couldn't get access to clean water because of, of a large ravine between them and the water source. So in this story, um, they shared a way that the people in the village actually overcame the problem. So the first thing that happened was they noticed that their water had always been bad. And they probably didn't notice that the water had always been bad until they found out that there was a source of clean water that they didn't have access to. So the next phase is doubts arise. What doubts or concerns did the hero have prior to taking action? And you want to state the doubts or concerns in the voice of the main character. For example, put yourself in the character's shoes and think, what would they say? So in this example, this dirty stream was the only water source that we'd ever known. So they began to doubt their own water source when they learned that there was drilling for a clean water source nearby, but they couldn't access it. So what idea, inspiration, or change occurred that pointed toward a possible solution? So in this example, One day, the villagers heard that a drilling rig could be used to find a new source of water, but a deep ravine stood between their village and the road that the rig would need to travel. And then we look at first steps. What was the first step taken by your main character, and what was their ultimate goal? And in this example with the villagers came together to discuss how to build a road around the ravine. And then you discuss the obstacles and challenges. What challenges or obstacles did the character encounter? For example, it would take months of hard work to build a road, and there were some people in the village who doubted that it could be done. And then next, you think about who your allies could be. So, what allies joined the work? What role did they play? And you want to show people involved in creating solutions to their own problems, as well as others who supported the cause. So, for example, families throughout the village contributed materials and labor to the work on the road. This allowed the rigs to access their region. So, there were a number of allies. What other actions are taken? And in this case, the people of the village and the rig workers joined forces to transport the rig, set it up, and they drilled for water. And then you want to show the breakthrough. And in this case, you're asking questions. What breakthrough occurred that helped the characters realize that they could overcome the obstacle? So they realized that they could overcome the obstacle at the moment that the drilling rig hit the water. And what is the impact on the people's lives? The people in the area had access to clean, safe water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. And what are some of the lessons learned that you can be sharing, with others to draw other people into your your organization in terms of supporters? Even, sometimes you might use these stories to attract people that you want to work for you, people who want to be on your board. So think of a specific lesson that the audience can take away from your story, and a specific action that they can take to help the cause. For example, Charity Water included a strong call to action. You can help us bring clean water to communities like this. So notice, even though the story is being told, the story that I just shared, that story was being told by Charity Water, it was told from the perspective of the people in the village. The heroes were the people in the village. They figured out they had a problem, and they figured out a solution, and they enlisted other people to support their cause. All right. And Charity Water is using this story so that they can raise money so that they can help people in other villages who have similar issues. And then when we look at the call to action, again, you want to ask your audience, or let your audience know exactly how it is, how they can help you. And that call to action is going to vary based on the, the target, or the target audience in this case. So you will ask people who are funders, obviously you'll ask them for money. You might ask them to introduce you to others. You'll ask people in your community to sign up for volunteers or partner with you. So again, it all depends on who the audience is. All right, so when we look at a successful story, you want to make sure that there's engagement, right? So a successful community is based on a shared interest, and in this case, your cause and authenticity, a genuine and participatory dialogue. So you want to be able to create a community around your cause. And your community, again, as I said before, is going to include a cross section of people. It's going to be your board members, it's going to be foundation, it's going to be people who use your services. So basically, your community is your stakeholders, and the level of engagement is very, very critical. People are likely to give to a cause that they're engaged in. All right, and your storytelling efforts are going to allow you to engage in ongoing conversation with your audiences, help them learn more about what they find compelling, or help you learn what they find compelling, and generate new ideas and connections to your cause. And again, you're going to tell your stories through a number of different media, your website and social media, sometimes through letters, sometimes through face-to-face meetings. But the more people are engaged, the more likely they are to help you. So you want to develop an engagement strategy. So obviously you always start off with goals and objectives. Then you want to identify targets for your message and find out where they hang out. And that could vary based on the target. And you want to develop content for the communication channels. So that could be media, social media posts, it could be blog posts, it could be videos, it could be pictures. And then you want to track the engagement statistics. And when we talk about engagement statistics, that's things like the number of likes, the number of shares, and even, things like the number of comments. So there are a number of nonprofit stories. The first story we're going to talk about is the founding stories. All right. So these are the stories of how the founder started the organization. So on their website, Shining Hope for Communities features the story of how a young man from an impoverished neighborhood began the organization. So it says here, Kennedy Odidi started Shining Hope for Communities in 2004 with passion, 20 cents, and a soccer ball. Growing up in Kibera, one of the largest slums in Africa, he experienced extreme poverty, violence, lack of opportunity, and deep gender inequality. All right, so that's the founder story, and it's a very inspiring story, and it draws people in. All right, and you have seen that time and time again. But the stories don't have to stop with the founder. There's also the individual impact story. And the individual impact story is basically a story that's told by the client to share, some of the struggles he or she has had with a certain issue and how they overcame it with the help of the organization. And then you've got the donor story. And here's a story where the donor is sharing how he or she got involved, right? So one of the keys to attracting donors and fundraisers is to show them other donors have gotten involved and how the experience was rewarding for them. All right. So, and it's also a good idea to encourage peer-to-peer fundraisers to explain how they can, connect to others and bring them into a cause. So here is the story of Steve Guyon and his experience with donating to the Pat Tillman Fund. And this is on their website, and he attracted others. And then you've got the volunteer stories. So again, the volunteers can talk about, how they got involved and what their experience has been like. And then in turn, these stories can encourage others not only to volunteer, but, funders who may not necessarily have time to volunteer, they may feel so moved to actually donate money. So here's a copy of a screenshot from their website from the Special Olympics. 3 years ago, Brad was asked to organize a unified flag football game at the University of Alabama. Notice they engaged other people by tagging others who were involved. So they tagged the University of Alabama. So that story not only is on their social media, but it's on University of Alabama social media. Today, as we celebrate reaching 1.2 million unified teammates, we take a look at what Brad has learned these few years from Special Olympics College at University of Alabama, Play Unified. All right. And then we see his story. What Playing Unified has taught me. The following post is written by Brad Gardner, a student at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. 3 years ago, I was asked to organize a unified flag football team at the University of Alabama, and he goes on to tell his story. So we always have opportunities for storytelling. In the case of community development, you want to tell your community's story, particularly if you are developing a community that has been disinvested in. And typically, when we talk about communities that are in need of reinvestment, there is one set of forces that describe the community in a negative way, such to drive down the values of the property, and then they can come in and scoop it up. But it's the onus is on the people who live in the community not to let people from the outside tell their own story. People who live in developing communities, and I can say from experience living in North Lawndale, which is a community that gets a very negative rap, that it's very important that we tell our own story, talk about the positive things that are happening with the people, talk about the positive things that people are doing to develop their own institutions, develop their own organizations to help themselves. And those positive stories begin to attract not only other development that sees life through the lens of the community, but it also attracts investment from foundations. It if the stories are spun correctly, it attracts other development, housing development, um, commercial development, etc. And then you can also use your stories for site visits. When foundation representatives uh, come to visit your organization and are trying to decide whether or not to continue funding you or even make that first gift, it's very important that everyone with whom they come in contact with, so that could be a client that they come in contact with. It could be the receptionist. It could be a program manager, a board member. It's important that everybody that they talk to has a story, and that story be that story also be congruent with the overall story of the organization. So when pulled together, the site visit, the person who comes on a site visit has a perspective, a full perspective of the organization. Um, from the perspective of a client, from the perspective of a board member, from the perspective of a partner, from the perspective of maybe another funder. So they walk away with a full understanding of what the organization is about, how it's been impactful in the lives of many. Another opportunity for storytelling is in your annual report. You use your annual report to share, success stories for some of your clients. Talk about how your organization may have overcome some challenges internally. You can use the Form 990, not only to report your finances to the IRS, but there are several opportunities within that 990 where you could talk about the accomplishments that your organization has made during the year. You can take that step um, even further with your Guide Star profiles. The Guide Star profiles provide an opportunity where you can go into even more detail about what your organization is doing in the community. And there are 4 levels of disclosure, all the way from bronze all the way up to platinum. And the more you tell, the higher your rating is. And that actually can set you apart from other organizations, and help you attract more money. You want to use your board recruitment process. as an opportunity to tell stories. Tell stories for your organization, and you'll treat your board recruitment process very similarly to the way you would treat your site visit from a foundation. You want them to have a really good understanding of the organization from the top down, from various perspectives. And then obviously television interviews and radio interviews and live stream interviews gives you an opportunity to share your story. Blog posts give you an opportunity to share your story. Alrighty, so I'm going to end it right here. If you have any questions, feel free to share them in the comments section. If you are a member of the Nonprofit Utopia, feel free to continue this discussion in the Nonprofit Utopia community. We can also set up office hours if you want to go deeper in developing your organization's story. All right, so if you are interested in joining Nonprofit Utopia, you can do so at nonprofitutopia.mn.co, and you can find out more information about us at nonprofitutopia.com. And if you have any specific questions of me, you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. All righty. Okay, so I'm going to right now share with you some of the comments that we've gotten. And I say thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys for the beautiful comments. So I'm going to share with you a comment from Cy Lewis. Cy is one of our members. She's one of our most engaged members. She says, love this. We love you too, Cy. Thank you so much for being engaged, and thank you so much for sharing your perspectives from time to time. We really appreciate it. Darlene Barber, good morning, Valerie, Leonard, and everyone else. Thank you so much for joining us, Darlene. Good morning to you. And Sharon, oh my goodness, Sharon, I have not seen you in ages. Thank God for you, Sister Valerie F. Leonard. Thank you. Thank God for you, Sharon, and all the work that you do. And Miss Marva Collins was a perfect example of what you're teaching here. Yes, she was. She knew how to tell a really, really good story. All righty. So are there any more comments, any more questions before we go? Again, if you're a member of the Nonprofit Utopia community, feel free to continue this conversation in the Nonprofit Utopia community. And if you're not a member, now is a good time to join. You can go to nonprofitutopia.mn.co. Alrighty. So thank you again, and you guys continue to have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.